Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. So I'm going to do a little bit of framing. I'm going to be moderating this first session here. So Brian shared yesterday about the history, a little bit of the history of Holacracy and its growth over the past few years. So it's come a long way, which means there's more of a need than ever for qualified coaches to help with Holacracy, help clients. And that's really a lot of what our panel is about today, of experienced master coaches sharing, the very best insights from their learning, the challenges of coaching Holacracy with clients in the real world. So a couple of ground rules here. Audience, you may ask questions. I'll start off. I'm the moderator, right? So I'll ask a starting question and stuff. But then from there, we'll be adaptive. We can take questions from you all. I have plenty to ask. And panelists as well. Feel free to ask each other questions if you want to follow up on something. Go ahead and I'll do my introductions now, and then we'll do a poll. So I'll start with Karilen Mays here, HolacracyOne partner, master coach. Brian mentioned a little bit yesterday. Karilen's worked with probably almost every single one of H1's clients in some detail, led a number of implementations as a master coach, as I mentioned, and has just a wealth of experience. So she'll be panelist A. Panelist B is Diederick Janse. Also extraordinarily experienced co-founder of Energize, Masters in International Business Studies, co-authored the Getting Teams Done book, which was really the first book on Holacracy, even before Brian's book, slightly beat Brian's book, remember that. Also, there's lots of experience with implementations and coaching clients. And then that was panelist B. Panelist C, Olivier Compagne. He is a HolacracyOne partner as well, also a certified master coach. Also worked with a lot of clients, has a master's in integral psychology as well, and developed really kind of the first practitioner assessment and first coach assessment and things like that. So a lot of experience there to share about coaching. First thing, I want to do a quick little poll here. So how many of you all are already certified coaches? Okay, great, thanks. How many are certified facilitators? Excellent. How many have done a year or more of facilitation? Forget certifications, but just done a year or more of facilitation. Okay, quite a number. How many really haven't done any facilitation or coaching, but are just kind of here curious to learn more? One or two. Okay, cool. Awesome, great. Fantastic. That gives us a lot to kind of work with. Thank you for that. So let's go ahead and just jump in. I need my coffee, of course. And Karilen, you can, we can use that handout. So I'm going to go ahead and start. My first question for the panelists here, I want each of you to answer this, is what is your worst biggest mistake you've made in kind of coaching or working with clients?
Let's get this over with. This is a confessional, right? So I had a lot of fun preparing for this. I made a long list of fuck-ups, and I really got into it, actually. It's quite enjoyable. It's almost liberating. It's releasing. So, but there's something about doing it in relationship, right? So I was doing this by myself. So I think I want to stand up and say, hi, I'm Diederick, and I'm a lazy coach. I think that's my main confession that I want to make. You know how Brian always talks about the risk of over-designing, the risk of over-coaching, like getting in there all the time and not letting them find their own rhythm, not letting the process do the work. Well, I wanted to be unique and make my own mistakes, so I went the other way. I tend to under-design and under-coach, or at least I did for quite a while. And I think it was coming from a good place, which is a deep trust in the process. Like really trusting that the process can do the work and it doesn't need me to heroically step in, heroically coach. But I probably took it a little far. Like that's me. I really wanted to explore the boundaries. So I can share a couple more points later, but one to get started with. When you get started with a client, there's this whole process of figuring out the initial structure, right? And the big risk, of course, is going circle crazy seeing circles everywhere, over-designing the structure, trying to figure out the roles exactly. I didn't do that. I went quite the other way. We kind of developed a process at Energized where we kind of involve everyone in building it bottom up. But the way I would coach them is really erring towards the side of just workable, just good enough, like just good enough. And then we would get started, and it would actually be quite hard. You know, like the circles may be all right, but in terms of the roles, there was just very little there. And I think what I learned over time with a couple of clients, like I made this mistake with maybe some of you in the room even, was that the risk of rejection went up. Like you can take it too far. If you really set up an initial structure that's under-designed, then they've got to do all that work in the first couple of governance meetings, which, as you know, are kind of slow and clunky and frustrating. So I think to Holacracy's credit, we mostly managed, nevertheless, like despite this fuck up, this problem. So the process did do the work, but it was slow and painful, and they would want to take shortcuts, and I would coach them against it. So let me wrap up this, at least first confession, by sharing that I think it's good to get the balance right. You know, like definitely don't over-design, but there is such a thing as under-designing too. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Diederick. Carol, Olivier.
Good morning, everyone. There's so many things that I could share to kind of confess something that I feel was not optimal or was a, quote, mistake or could have learned. So there's been a lot of learning with every implementation. Almost every week goes by. And first I'll briefly distinguish with coaching, so working with teams and circles and individuals, doing facilitation and helping them, versus designing a whole implementation and adapting the strategy as you go. So these are maybe two different skill sets. So as an implementation lead, I'm doing a lot of coaching with people from all parts of the organization, as well as figuring out with the Holacracy team members and key client contacts, what's our strategy? What's next? So one specific example of, well, why it's hard, because I'm supposed to be the expert. So I'm a certified master coach, so I should have the plan, right? And in fact, sometimes I feel responsible for the success of a Holacracy implementation. And this can really get in the way of, it could create an attachment and even, cloud your judgment about what to do. Fortunately, I know that I need help, and I almost am enlisting everybody in my discussions to figure out something more optimal all the time. So it's well mitigated in terms of, let's have multiple heads in the game. And when do we say, okay, the client had, I had a client, they had started implementing already. They were working with another coach, and they said, we want this. We want you to do exactly this. We want you to do some virtual meetings, facilitate a little bit. That's all we need. So do I want to build a relationship with the client? Do I want to give them what they suggest? Or do I say, no, we are not doing that at all. Here's actually what I suggest, by the way. And in fact, even though we agreed on that plan last week, I had a new insight, and I think this is not a good idea, and here's what I recommend instead. And so knowing when to hold that boundary and be vulnerable and say, either I don't know, or this is not the way I suggest, even if it's not going to make the client happy, because it's not at all what they actually thought. This is one challenge, and I think, so the client that said, let's come in, let's do virtual meetings, and I really wanted to start and not lose the momentum they had with this other coach, and they had unconstitutional governance, they had teams opting out, they had co-founders with some conflict, and I did not build a relationship with one of these co-founders, and we let things go on. I stay in relationships too long sometimes, so I wanted to stay, and I wanted to stay in it, and I think there were some things I could have done sooner in this particular case, and this client actually stopped doing Holacracy, although they're doing something very much like it anyway. So eventually it did shift, and we both mutually decided this is not really serving us anymore to work together. So that's a kind of brief tour into some of the issues I face.
That's great.
Good morning, everyone. So it's interesting, as I was listening to my two peers here, and we were checking with each other just before starting this panel to make sure that we're not gonna be talking about the same things. You know? And it's funny, as we were sharing, I realized it sounds like each of our stories is a reflection of our own very personal, pitfalls, just personally. Um, and yeah, mine was. I had to think about that, and the one that came to my mind pretty obviously was years ago when I was working with Zappos, and I got fired from the client by the client. Actually, that felt really bad. I was working with them. I was really proud to be working with them because it's Zappos, and it was our biggest implementation, and I was fairly new, and I got fired from it, unfortunately. So that made me really sad. What happened was that. I captured the archetype. So we had the lazy, forgot how you said it, the lazy coach. My archetype was the arrogant activist. I was like a Holacracy activist. I don't think I'm the only one. I've seen that in others as well. But definitely it was my case where I really got frustrated at I think it was like 2 or 3 teams that were really not getting it. I was trying hard. I was a good facilitator, and I think I'm good. And they were not getting it, and I got annoyed, especially their dynamic with the lead link. So the manager, ex-manager, who was now lead link, was really not releasing the authority. Others were bowing to the lead link, and that made me really annoyed because Holacracy is about distributed authority. They should get that. And after a while, they didn't get it. So I got annoyed, and I was trying to hide it as much as possible. Apparently, I didn't do a very good job because I heard from the person, our contact person over there. Actually, I heard about that from my colleague Brian. He told me, "Hey, I got a call from our contact over there, and they asked that if you can stop coaching for these teams." I was like, "Ouch!" Yeah, that hurt, and yeah, but in hindsight, I really recognized the danger though of I was really not serving them. When I was working with these teams, I was more serving myself, my idea of what I thought Holacracy should be and how it should be done. So that was my main insight. It was like, I should really be focusing on serving them, be of service, meet them where they are, and it will take the time it takes, and maybe it won't get there, but that's for them anyway. So if they don't get there, why do I have to be frustrated about that? I had the last insight about that I'm blanking out right now. I'll stop here. That was my...
We've got time. Thanks, Olivier. So I have another question at the start. Yes. And if anyone has questions as we're going in, just raise your hand. That way I'll know we can get the mic to you if we need it. I think one other helpful orienting question here, and this would be for any of you, anyone who wants to take it. How would you describe kind of the difference between like just a facilitator and like a coach, right? Like, how do you capture that essence, that difference?
I'll take a stab, and maybe Olivier can add. I like to. I think it's really important, right? Because you often play both roles in the beginning. You're both the facilitator for a new circle, but you're also coaching them. If you're not careful, they can really kind of mix together, and it gets really unclear. And now the elected facilitator of the circle feels like he or she needs to live up to all that. But it's not just facilitation; it's kind of constantly coaching and bringing brilliant stuff, and it's completely, of course, impossible for a just new facilitator. So I think it's really important to clarify the difference. I like to use a metaphor of sports. I like soccer. We're in Holland. We like soccer. So for me, and of course you've heard this from Brian, the facilitator is the referee, right? Completely neutral. But I want to add to that, like, the referee doesn't give a shit about the outcome of the game, right? The only thing that the referee cares about is, are we playing by the rules? And if not, let me stop the game, apply the rules, and then we continue. So in that case, in that respect, the facilitator is really uncaring. Now the coach cares a lot about the outcome of the game. and is continuously wanting to improve the team's play, trying different passes, doing different things, stopping the game, using timeouts to give coaching. So imagine how weird it would be if those two things, were fused. A referee that would sometimes stop the game and say, "You could have scored a goal there, you fool." Well, probably that's not good coaching, but so that's what I try to remember for myself, making the distinction between those two roles. Anything to add, Olivier, panelist C?
Maybe one thing I was thinking as you were talking was that example of analogy with the referee. I love it, and actually I use it when I coach, when I'm facilitating a meeting, and I feel that people are trying to rely on me a bit too much. Then I tell them that, I explain, hey, I'm just a referee, right? The referee doesn't care if the players play really badly, the referee doesn't really care. The players are gonna care. That's gonna be a really bad game, but the referee doesn't care. So I tell them that, and it's actually a coaching move to tell them that, which is fun.
Yeah, question? Let's see. Yeah, we only got this one mic, so let's try it here. And I'll just move it back.
My question is, how is Holacracy consulting different than maybe other consulting, like doing project management implementation or Scrum or whatever? But how is it, and how is it different?
I haven't done other consulting personally, although we've worked with a lot of other consultants who do professional IT services, learning development, all sorts of consulting. And one key thing that I would say might be different, but I think should be the same, is the relationship of the provider or the coach with the client. And instead of a coach and a client, we become partners. And we figure it out together. We adapt our plan. We don't plan it all out up front because we know that we're going to have to change it because there's going to be restructures and we only have a certain capacity at once. So the notion of instead of a provider-client, it becomes a partnership and we're vulnerable together and we get in there together and we adapt as we go and we align and we reset our expectations. And this is my approach to not having to have all the answers and having a much better answer by really collaborating with the client. And I hypothesize that other consulting might be really well suited to this approach too. So I don't know if anyone else has another answer to this question or other questions.
I think I would want to distinguish between expert consulting and process consulting. And I think it's maybe similar to process consulting done well. So I like the term coach myself more than consultant. I think the key difference is that we're not the experts. So we're not going to tell you how to solve your problem, how to solve your tension. We're here to teach you a process that will help you solve your tension yourself once and then on and on. So I think that's a key difference. There are probably others. But it's really difficult not to get drawn in, like Karilen talked about it before, like feeling responsible and feeling like you may have answers or you may have ideas about how to structure governance. Not to get drawn in and just give them the answers and solve it for them, but teach them the process. So maybe similar to some consulting, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really there is a distinction, right, between teaching them how, coaching people for learning the process so that they can solve their own issues, business issues, and also helping with the business issues themselves. And I don't think that there is a clear line between the two. I mean, after I've been working with so many clients, you kind of see patterns, you see things, and sometimes they jump at you when you see maybe a business that is less mature than another one you've seen. You can clearly say, wow, okay, I noticed this thing, and I've actually seen that working in other businesses, so you can point it out. I don't think you can not do that. And I mean, if you can offer value, great, I would say. But I think the distinction is important, making the distinction, not telling them that's how you should be doing it. But hey, here is one option, something we've seen. In the end, since Holacracy is really a meta process, they get to choose, right?
Cool. Well, I have one follow-up question. It's slightly back to that distinction because of the number of facilitators that I kind of saw in the room. I'm curious, how many of you all as facilitators are interested in becoming certified coaches? Okay, third round. So taking the idea of like that essence, what does that look like? I don't know, in practice. Like what's like a good anecdote or a good observable thing that you see in a meeting that kind of distinguishes like a facilitator level from a coach level, right? So you talk about like you care more about the outputs in some ways. You care more about the team and how they're playing. But like, what's a good concrete example of that distinction as it might show up in a meeting?
I'm going to start. I'm not going to answer a question. I'm going to answer another one. If you don't mind.
Like a good politician.
Which is what did I have for breakfast? So actually, so the way, so I do a lot of assessments with Chris. So we do a lot of, many of you I'm sure have seen when you are taking the assessment to become a coach. And one of the ways I frame the coach credential sometimes is by like getting your driver's license, right? So when you get your driver's license, it doesn't mean that you're a pilot, that you're going to be awesome on the road. It just means that you're not dangerous. Not at least safe enough. You can drive on public roads. It's going to be the same. So I make more distinctions actually between coaches. And the distinction that for me I see is where it becomes, when you can become really, I don't know, like exponentially more useful is when the process goes into the background, where you don't have to think about it, where you're completely comfortable with the process, facilitating it, right? So that you can focus on the rest. Because there are so many different layers of things you have to think about when you're facilitating and coaching. You know, the process, and then how people are using it, and how can you best intervene to help them learn it most effectively. So if you have the process completely nailed down, then you can focus on the rest, and that makes a big difference. So I know that's not the question you asked, Chris. But
no, it's great. Karilen, if you want to add something? Yeah, and we might try it this way. If you just say the question, I'll repeat it maybe for the recording, and we'll just keep the mic up here. So whoever had a question.
Yeah, coming from a slightly different perspective, I'm curious what you or others have seen. I'm in a role where I used to be management team, and now one of my roles is Holacracy coach. Obviously, that team made a huge success. We had it for 7 months. What are the traps, my traps, or be my traps from your experience? What are the tips and tricks how I navigate that transition?
Great.
Yeah, I still have leading roles as well, but I know it's
yeah. So the question was.
Here, curious to be a really good Holacracy coach. I don't know. Right. Different position.
Yeah. So the question was coming from the management team. Now Lead Link, what are pitfalls or tips and tricks? And Holacracy coach, what are some of the pitfalls or tips and tricks? Things to watch out for from that particular perspective.
In my role as a coach.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I will highlight is that you just mentioned in my role as a coach. So I think being able to differentiate your roles, where you're coming from, it's very basic, but this is a good practice to continue because it's going to be easy for some people to see you. Sorry, what is your name?
Jan Willem.
Jan Willem?
Yeah.
So somebody is going to see Jan Willem as like this legacy leader, this former manager, despite your intentions and your roles, right? So simple things like in my role as Holacracy coach, I have some coaching to offer you. Would you like it? Or setting a context for providing a coaching. It's very simple. It's effective. And it's repetition until people can join you in the dynamic of coach versus the manager, right? The other thing I would suggest is very difficult for internal employees or whoever to become an internal coach because maybe you're involved in the dynamics or whatever. So it's also very powerful, especially if the CEO or senior management is becoming a coach. There's different ways you can coach without being a Holacracy coach. One is by being an exemplary lead link. So look at our competency model, mature yourself as a lead link, because there's also many opportunities to coach from that role. So you have defined roles. You're not just a lead link in a circle, which sort of perpetuates this management dynamic. This is one example. Find ways to offer pathways as a lead link. In addition, in your coach journey, coach some circles who you might have less involvement, less dynamic with. So until you get even more capacity and you build your expertise and your credibility as a coach, Then in the meantime, divide up the work by trying to work closely with a circle that you have a good relationship with, but you're not in the middle of their dynamics. So you're more like an internal, external. So those are a few tips, top of head.
2 years ago, I was working with a company. The CEO, at some point we sat down and he asked me, okay, so I have an issue, all these people in the organization, they're not quite getting it, I don't know how to, push it so that they process their tensions more. That's the big issue, people are not processing their tensions, which is typical because it's a new muscle, right? It's not obvious. And he was asking me, what can I do? What can I do to help with that? And I think the answer was actually, don't do anything that is outside of your roles. And he was lead link of the organization, so he was CEO, then lead link of the GCC. And I think the answer, at least my suggestions to him, was to process your own tensions. Don't try to make people change or be different, and process your own tensions through your role of lead link, which is many tensions that make sense to be processed from that role. But it was a reframe from which I think a lot of it comes with the activists. I think for me at least I recognize it that way. Especially newer coaches can get in that. Oh yeah, this new thing, Holacracy is awesome. I need to push it to everyone. And instead, I kind of reframed it for him into don't try to change other people, process your own tensions, and be a role model in that way. And be a role model, show people what you're doing, and therefore what they can do as well.
Great. Yeah, another question?
Can I just add one little tip? Just like a really concrete one. It can be really almost schizophrenic, right? Filling multiple roles. So give people a window into your schizo mind. By doing it out loud. That's what I do all the time, even in Energize. Like I fill 10 roles, and I will get a question, and I'll be like, oh shit, which role? So I might ask, but I might also just kind of begin to think out loud about, well, I guess this role might have a perspective, and this other role might have a perspective. Maybe this one does too, actually. So what do you want? And then even remind myself out loud of what's the purpose of this role again? Right, it's to do this. And then that helps me get into the right mode while kind of modeling what I'm doing. But really, it's not just modeling as in, here's me being kind of a great coach. I need it. I need to do that out loud to help myself kind of find the right role and speak from that role. And just mentioning the purpose of that role helps me. Like one role I feel is tension processing support. That's a very different role from like a more content-driven role. If I talk from that role, I'm not going to get into the content of our conversation at all. I'm just going to help you find the pathways and keep my damn mouth shut about my opinions and everything else. That may be the role that you want, or there's another. So do it out loud. I think that's a really good one. Although it can seem a little weird to people at first, but it's quite powerful.
Great. Yeah, your question, right? Yeah, that's fine.
One of the things I found that companies which have evolved in terms of organizations are more interested in finding out what is holacracy because they're always looking for something new, something to innovate. However, those companies are usually great places to work, great climate, great interpersonal relationships and all that. And one of the obstacles I kind of found, maybe you can tell me more about that, is that when you install Holacracy, even though it helps them have better meetings and more efficient meetings and all that, they immediately see a shock to the culture because Holacracy is more a process of dealing with tensions in the roles, and it gets the human being kind of out of the equation. So, what do you tell these people? Because at the beginning you don't see the benefits. It takes some time to see the benefits, at least 3 months, 4 months. They feel they're like breaking the culture. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, great question. I see a lot of heads nodding from the panel. Anyone want to take it, Olivier?
Yeah, it's true. Well, I wouldn't say you don't see any benefit before several months. I think the there are some benefits pretty early on, typically, and some benefits that people can kind of foresee. They can see how it's going to be really useful when people can do that better, even if they are not quite getting it yet. But there are some benefits. Yeah, I see what you mean. There is definitely there is like a diffusion, right? A differentiation with Holacracy of the role and soul, as Brian would put it, and the people and their roles, which is which hurts in some way. Kind of any tearing apart of something that's fused, it hurts. Typically what I tell them is you need to go through it. That's the first thing. You need to go through it. I don't try to explain the whole thing. You need to go through it. That will a different way of expressing your culture, which is still important, will emerge with Holacracy. That will be slightly different, and I don't go into too much more details about that. In fact, if your question actually is coming from like you're talking to a company and they maybe heard that and they're asking for you to explain the whole thing before they even try Holacracy, I think it's a trap. Tell them, you know what, just try it. Just try Holacracy for a couple of days. And let me give you an experience, and you'll see. You'll have a better sense of what it is, so that you can maybe answer that for yourself. But that's more for the business development side of the question. Otherwise, I think it's there is also definitely a vacuum right now. So Chris is working on what we call internally at HolacracyOne the whole product. Holacracy, the whole product, right? Holacracy is the constitution, and I think Brian was mentioning yesterday, the constitution is just the operating system for the organization, right? Holacracy is the operating system, as we say. An operating system alone is not enough. It's not very useful. You need apps on it, and you need some hardware to work, which I guess the people are the hardware, I guess. And right now we don't have anything really to offer very specific, like easily for organizations to deal with the people side of things. So they have to deal with it. Just like they have to deal, as you probably know, we have a badge, for example, for compensation, we have a badge app, right? Which at least is one answer. It's like, hey, you don't want to do compensation the conventional way? Here's another way. And I think some other companies have other ways as well. For dealing with the people aspect of things, we don't have anything to offer at this point. So people have to figure something out. Not that it's impossible, it's not, but they have to figure it out. So I think it's one of definitely a vacuum right now that we're trying to fill, and that we're exploring in HolacracyOne directly and playing with.
I'm wondering, can I just throw in a quick confession again? Because I have this long list of fuck-ups that I shared, and I kind of want to share another one which I think is relevant. I mean, your question raises or touches on something that's been missing from the conversation a little bit. We've been talking about coaching, which suggests that you've got a good client and you're already underway, but there's a lot of stuff that happens that when you're coaching, it's already almost too late to deal with. Like it's really what comes before that, which is kind of the sales process, the business development process, which clients do you work with, that kind of sows the seeds of a lot of potential fuck-ups and pitfalls. And I learned this the hard way, so here's another confession. I have been involved with Holacracy for like 10 years, and for the first couple of years, it was really, really lonely. Right? Like I felt like I was out there in the desert, kind of selling this crazy thing and that no one had heard of. And so when someone would even say, yeah, I think I've heard of that, or maybe I've read something about it, I went, really, really? Like where, what, how? Kind of all over them. Sorry, got distracted by a time call there. So by the time that Holacracy became a little bit more well-known and people started finding us at Energized, it was in my DNA to accept every friggin' client. Right? Like I was so happy if someone wanted to try Holacracy, I would just accept them, kind of no questions asked, almost. And I think that DNA has kind of gave us some trouble because it meant that we accepted a lot of clients that maybe the conditions weren't quite right. Like for example, what you talked about, the great places to work, the companies that are already doing really well. Now, looking back, I think those are probably the only companies to work with. Because if they've got other issues, like cash flow issues or like really serious survival issues, it's pretty much impossible to do. But I had to find this out by trying it. So I think it brought us a lot of learning. But I think part of doing great coaching is doing great hiring, like being really picky about who you work with. And when you're getting started as a coach, that's a really tough balance to strike, because you need business, you need to get started.
Being right, so you say that the best companies for Holacracy are the great business work?
I would argue so, yeah. Like if they're dealing with a lot of other issues, like culture is really bad, there's not a lot of safety, they've got business issues, like maybe the former management has just stepped out, whatever, like that creates so many problems. I'm not saying it's impossible. We've had some successful implementations in those cases. It just makes it so much harder. So that would be a big learning from having hired every friggin' client. Don't. Be really, really picky. And you have to balance that with, just getting some practice in. I probably wouldn't have hired Springist these days, which has been like our most amazing ambassador. So there is a balance there, but I think that bit is really important.
Thanks. And so I'm going to do a quick, we've only got a few minutes left, which is hard to believe. So I'll let Karilen answer the question, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. But I wanted to give you a heads up.
I believe that one of the reasons Holacracy does not include answers to culture is because often these are so unique and so custom. So it's true, I would like to have more possibilities, more templates, more standards to start from. So I don't see sales as sales. That's coaching. It's advising. It's setting things up for success. If there's concerns about the culture, then we put it out on the table. We define the roles. In fact, maybe there's a regular all-hands meeting, or maybe there's team-building activities. You can capture that in your preparation work, or when it comes up later, this is attention for the organization. It's not attention with Holacracy. You don't have to apologize for it. And you get in there with the client and you help them figure it out. You give them the pathways. If you can advise them, you advise them. And this is their tension. And so this is not doing everything in a tactical and governance meeting. Back to Frank's point on reflection time, other spaces, create spaces for reflection, make that known to others, and set it up as a learning journey. So set the expectation of learning. For brevity, I will stop there.
Well, I just started, so we got a few more minutes, so I can probably take one more question. Kim, yeah? Did you have a, yeah?
Related to the culture aspect.
Hold on, let's give you the mic.
Related to the culture aspect, do you see any differences, different challenges, different way of supporting Holacracy adoption related to the country you're in, related to the continent you're working in?
Thanks. Hot potato.
I was gonna say the obvious language. Yeah, language is an issue. For culture, I mean, I don't think I have a great answer, but I know we're starting to work more internationally, and I think definitely different cultures have different strengths and weaknesses. Different. Yeah, we're working with Dubai quite a bit right now. We're trying to work in China, and so compare those, and Europe and the US, these are very different cultures. India also, in China, for example, there is a strong, and others could be talking about that better than me. We have some Chinese folks in the room, but people are not used to speaking up. If the leader is talking, you don't voice your concern. Things like that. But I think in the US, for example, the US is a very kind of egalitarian culture at work compared to, a lot of China or France. And that has its own challenges, and everybody's trying to get buy-in from everybody else before making a decision. It's just a different kind of issue. But yeah, I don't see, maybe to answer maybe the question behind your question, I don't see it being easier with a specific culture than over another, or at least I don't have enough data to say that.
Thanks, Karilen. Yeah.
Having spent time in Indonesia, Dubai, Germany, and probably some other places in the last year in the US, I really think there's more the same than is different. But every company thinks their culture is unique, which it is, and they think it's extra unique because of their country. And it might be, but I think the particular people who are on the team that we're working with and these power dynamics and social hierarchies are the real difference. So it's really in the organization, how diverse are they, what is their culture like? That's like been my answer for a while, but then as I go more and more forward, I think there's patterns of maybe consensus or patterns of not communicating or whatever, and these seem to span all of the teams that I have the opportunity to work with so far.
Thanks. Let's give our panel a big round of applause.